Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. We're here on Treaty 6 territory, and I also want to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a very deep connection with this land. My name's Sarah Hoffman, and I'm the Alberta New Democrat MLA for Edmonton-Glenora, as well as our Shadow Minister for Health. And today I'm joined by Rakhi Pancholi, my colleague, and our Deputy Leader. It's been a week since we learned of the very serious allegations against the UCP government from the former AHS CEO who was let go last month. Let's be clear, these are very serious allegations, and they haven't been proven yet. But if they are true, there are some very serious questions, and that's why we are here today. Albertans deserve to know if, as alleged, Premier Danielle Smith and her Health Minister, Adriana LaGrange, did intentionally fire the CEO and the board of AHS when they raised questions about the very serious and expensive public contracts that were given to friends of the UCP government. So to be clear, these contracts total more than $500 million that we know of. There could be more. All of this money allegedly going to friends and insiders of the current government. Friends that we've seen before. These are the same people who were in luxury skyboxes with the UCP during the hockey playoffs last year. The same folks who cashed in on selling very expensive Turkish Tylenol to Albertans that we were all forced to pay for, and many of us didn't even get. People want to ensure that they can see a doctor when they need one, or that if somebody they love is in pain, that there's a plan to end that pain. So when you're sick or injured, or when somebody you love is sick or injured, nothing else matters. The UCP could invest this money in a world-class public health care system to ensure that we all get the care that we deserve. But instead, they're alleged of taking your public dollars and funneling it towards UCP insiders, while cancer patients can't get an oncologist, or a patient in need of a hip replacement can't get one. Just a couple of weeks ago, we introduced you to Wendy, who has been waiting immobile at home in pain for more than a year when she was told her surgery would be in 3 months. Nearly 1 million Albertans are without a family doctor. Others are waiting for life-changing or life-saving surgeries. And all we see from the UCP is chaos and cover-ups. It's unethical, it's reckless, it's incompetent, and it could very well be corrupt. This has to stop. They have been hiding for a week, Leader Rakhi Pancholi, to tell you a little bit more about what we are proposing.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's get right to the point. Albertans deserve a government that operates with integrity, transparency, and accountability. Instead, the Health Minister announced yesterday that the government is investigating itself behind closed doors after firing the very people who are raising concerns about the UCP's alleged wrongdoing in the first place. The allegations of corruption are unlike anything we've seen from any government in Alberta. What was a bad situation when the allegations first broke is now far, far worse than we could have possibly imagined. The Premier's office staff itself is implicated, which implicates the Premier. The Health Minister is directly implicated by her own directive. The newly installed CEO of AHS also happens to be the board of AHS and also happens to be the Deputy Minister of Health, and he reports directly to the same UCP government who will be overseeing this investigation. The investigation will be conducted by an undisclosed third party reporting directly to the Premier. This is absurdity. At best, this appears to be a conflict of interest on many levels. At worst, it could be one of the most egregious examples of corruption this province has ever seen. The only thing that could possibly make this more ridiculous is if the third party being hired to investigate the UCP were the same group that brought Alberta Turkish Tylenol. And frankly, under Danielle Smith and Adriana LaGrange, that is not beyond the realm of possibility. This is not what accountability looks like. This is a circus. Albertans are tired of watching this government run in circles to protect themselves and their friends. They want transparency. They demand it. Danielle Smith herself has said she wants a fully transparent and expedited investigation. If she truly believes in transparency, then her government must take immediate steps to prove it. The Premier must reconvene the Legislature immediately so this issue can be addressed where it belongs, under public scrutiny, in front of the elected representatives of the province of Alberta. Albertans have not seen their Premier here for weeks. She has not stood before the public to answer for this. Her absence raises serious questions. Either she is hiding from Albertans, or she does not believe in the gravity of these allegations and the urgency with which they need to be addressed. The best disinfectant for all of this is sunshine. Yeah. If the UCP government has nothing to hide, they should be willing to stand in the Legislature, the People's House, and answer questions. As well, Danielle Smith and Adriana LaGrange are directly implicated in these allegations. They cannot oversee an investigation into their own government's conduct. If they have any respect for Albertans and any respect for the rule of law, if they truly have no part to play in these allegations, then they must step aside while this investigation unfolds. Anything less is an insult to the people of this province. Anything less is a cover-up of corruption. Albertans deserve better. Thank you, and we'll now be happy to take your questions.
$500,000 is a lot of money. Can you break that number down?
We'll move on to questions now. If you could please state your name and outlet before you ask your question. If you're on Zoom, use the raise hand function, please, and *9 if you are on the phone.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my question. That's a big number that you floated. Can you break that number down, and where did you get that number?
Well, the allegations made by the former CEO of AHS include suggestions of over $614 million in contracts that have been distributed already to the people involved, the companies involved in the surgical contracts, as well as the Turkish Tylenol contracts. The truth is that we don't know the truth. Albertans don't know the details because that information is being covered up. And the allegations have made it clear that there is something to look at here. So we would love to have full transparency about how much money of Alberta taxpayers has gone to these companies under contracts that have raised the concern of many of the CEO, of the board of AHS, all who were fired shortly thereafter. They have raised questions about these contracts. Albertans don't know the answers. This is precisely the point. All of this is being hidden and covered up, and we deserve transparency and accountability.
Sure. And why not release names of the insiders who supposedly benefited here?
These are all contained in allegations that are made by the former CEO. We are operating off of the fact that those are the allegations that were made. This is very much the question that I think Albertans would love to know. Who was involved? What are the relationships with the UCP government? How much were the contracts for? How much did those contracts vary from what would be a typical contract for these kinds of services? This is precisely the point, which is that Albertans do not know. But we do know that there is significant enough concern about the content of those contracts, who they were entered into, their value, their worth, that the CEO of AHS was raising those questions, as was the board of AHS. So this is precisely what Albertans deserve to know, is what exactly was going on.
Catherine Grukowski, Alberta Today. So in the Premier's written statement, she said that there is widespread and deep-seated resistance to change that we must overcome with AHS. I'm wondering, what message do you think she's trying to send, or what do you hear when you hear her words there?
The Premier would like very much to characterize AHS as somehow a separate entity from herself and from her government. However, the reality is that Danielle Smith's government has been the most interventionist, the most heavy-handed with AHS of any government in Alberta. Through the 2 years that Danielle Smith has been Premier, she has replaced the CEO of AHS multiple times. She's completely fired the board twice. We know that the allegations that were made, that were released last week, indicate that her staff in her office were allegedly placing pressure on AHS, had perhaps even brought in specific staff into AHS to be involved in these contracts. Those are the allegations that are made. Very much the last 2 years have demonstrated what Danielle Smith is doing with AHS. That's very, very clear. So when she's trying to, I think, characterize or push off responsibility, she needs to remember that she's the Premier of Alberta. Adriana Smith is the Minister of Health. They are accountable to Albertans for what is happening in our healthcare system and in AHS.
And the Premier in Washington today said that she was asked when she knew about the allegations. Mm-hmm. She said she learned about the allegations through the newspaper, and she also said that she has been asking for this information from Alberta Health Services. For 8 months. There have been questions of what did she know and when. What difference does it make in terms of the Premier's involvement in all this?
So, again, we go back to the fact that the Premier and Adriana LaGrange are fully responsible and fully accountable regardless. They are the Premier and the Minister of Health. However, the allegations that came out last week indicate that they had a very clear, direct involvement in what was happening in AHS. The allegations, if true, suggest that it was actually the Premier's Chief of Staff that was involved. So if the Premier did not know, this suggests she either is being untruthful about her knowledge of what her staff are doing, or that she is wildly incompetent to not know what her Chief of Staff is doing. Those are big concerns. However, we also know that the Premier's statement today about needing to know or wanting to know what was going on in AHS, she claimed that she has been asking for evidence of wrongdoing for 8 months. If you believe the allegations that were made in the former CEO's letter last week, you will see that it's not that she's been asking for evidence of wrongdoing in AHS, but rather the pressure was about wanting to know why those contracts for chartered surgical facilities weren't it does not seem, according to the allegations, that she was looking for evidence of wrongdoing. In fact, when that evidence of wrongdoing was brought to the Minister of Health by the former CEO, by the board of AHS, both were summarily dismissed by this government. So it is beyond belief for the Premier to now say that she was not aware, because her government was certainly aware if you look at those allegations, and it seems more like she's trying to cover up her involvement.
Hi, Morgan with Global. I'm wondering what would be a reasonable timeline for the Auditor General report? I'm not sure if you have like prior experience of how long these usually take or what you would like to see from the timeline.
Well, I mean, these are very serious allegations. We don't know how much information has already been made available and what still needs to be made available. I don't think I can comment specifically on the timelines other than to say we need to have transparency from this government right now. These allegations broke over a week ago. The Premier has not set foot in the province to be able to answer those questions. The Minister of Health gave a very cursory comment yesterday. We deserve transparency and accountability right now. That is why we're here today, asking for the Legislature to be reconvened so that we as the representatives on all the 87 MLAs, including, might I add, the members of the government caucus, should be willing to ask some questions about their Premier and about their Health Minister, about what's going on, because every single MLA has to be accountable to our constituents, to Albertans. But they also have to realize, particularly on the government side, that they're now attached to a government that has been potentially implicated in one of the worst corruption scandals in this province's history. So we need some transparency and accountability right now. I trust the Auditor General to do a good job and an expedited review, but we cannot wait for those outcomes to hear some answers from the Premier. She wants to dodge questions. We need her to come and face Albertans.
And then why not wait for the AG report to be finished? Is it that you are calling for the AG report and then the Premier to address things, or you would like, as Mr. Nenshi has said, the RCMP investigation, things like that? Like, could you break down what you think each investigation would accomplish and why you would want that instead of just the AG to finish its report?
Well, I think we know that based on the allegations that were made last week, that there may be evidence of criminal wrongdoing. That was clear that the board had recommended that the matter go to the RCMP. And so there could be allegations of criminality here, so the RCMP needs to investigate. The Auditor General absolutely has a responsibility to look at procurement processes and contract processes to see that they're done properly and efficiently and effectively. That is the role of the Auditor General. Of course, the Ethics Commissioner also has a role to play to see whether or not there's been any conflicts of interest. And of course, we have a responsibility as legislature and as the official opposition to ask questions of government. But we also need a public inquiry that can look at all of these pieces. The truth of the matter is why we are looking for answers and investigations at all these levels, and why there should be, is because the allegations go right to the heart of so many issues. They go to potential criminality, potential conflict of interest, potential improper procurement processes. We need a fulsome public inquiry to also look at all of those pieces. What we cannot do is allow the government to investigate themselves, because they clearly have put out, yesterday the Minister of Health was saying she's going to be hiring an undisclosed third party to investigate themselves, and they're not going to disclose that report. I'll go directly to the Premier. The whole issue here is about secrecy and cover-up potentially from the government. We cannot then ask that same government to investigate itself and to rely on, again, a secretive contract with a third party to do that fulsomely. We need all of these mechanisms. But fundamentally today we're saying let's get back in the legislature where government is supposed to answer questions from the opposition on behalf of Albertans, but we need all of these processes to proceed.
Hi, Sean Amato with City News. Just wanted to ask you about the CUPE situation in Alberta. 5 more locals voted to join strike action. We could have 5,000 education support workers on strike next week, potentially. What does the NDP think about that?
Let me just begin to say, as a parent of 2 elementary age school kids, and I've seen the education workers that are critical to the operation of my kids' school on the strike line. I've gone to see them. I know the staff at the school are struggling to get by without them. They're the heart and soul of the school. I know the students who are not able to attend class because they don't have their EA support with them, and the parents who are struggling to make sure their kids have access to a proper education and make sure that they can go to work and function. This is a heartbreaking situation for all involved, but fundamentally, this is because we have a provincial government that has made the decision to underfund Alberta schools and Alberta classrooms so that we are the lowest per student funding for education funding in the country. That is an embarrassment, and that has a direct impact on the ability of schools to be able to staff appropriately. These are staff who do critical work, who are making just above minimum wage, who are so important to families. They deserve to be compensated fairly, and what we have is a provincial government that has been putting their finger on the bargaining table, influencing what's happening at that bargaining table improperly, but fundamentally have underfunded school boards to the extent that we are now in the position where education workers are looking to just get a basic living wage, and they have to take this action, and this all should be falling on the UCP government. Parents should be putting the pressure on the UCP government to fund education properly in this province so that we have the EAs and the supports that we need in classrooms to make sure that every student has an opportunity for success.
How would an NDP government solve this issue? And you say fair wages a few times there. What is a fair wage for these workers?
Look, I'm not going to intervene and say what that fair wage should be. That's what the union is doing right now on behalf of their members, is advocating at the bargaining table for that. What I will say is that we have always had a commitment as the NDP to funding education properly. Sarah can mention, knows when she was in government and as a minister, we funded student enrollment growth. We made sure that there was enough funding for every student in every classroom in Alberta. That is what we did when we were in government, and that is what we would continue to do, is to not to starve our classrooms and our students of the access to the education they need. We would make sure that we fund education properly.
Hey, Travis McEwen, CBC News. You mentioned near the end of your speech a call for folks to step aside. I'm wondering if you can just expand on that. Who would you like to see step aside and when?
Sure, yeah, thanks. While they're in the middle of this investigation on the Smith surgery scandal, Danielle Smith has does not have the confidence of Albertans to be able to oversee the government. So stepping aside while that investigation happens to see if she indeed was involved in what's being alleged, I think is absolutely imperative, as well as the health minister who was directly named in the stories that we've seen, and some other senior officials, and I believe the Minister for Mental Health was named as well. So anyone who's named as being allegedly involved in what could be the largest surgery scandal or really government scandal we've seen in recent memory should step aside and let due process happen, including a judge-led review to ensure that anyone who wants the trust of the people to be able to govern is doing so with integrity, with the best interests of Albertans at mind. So they should step aside. They still have a government. The government can continue to operate, but Smith, LaGrange, and anyone else who is named needs to step aside while a judge looks at this and we can get to the bottom of it, and all Albertans can have the facts, because this is core to the responsibility of a provincial government and to the question of integrity.
All right, we'll take some questions on Zoom here next. First up, we're going to have Jack Farrell from Canadian Press. Jack, your line should be open.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. I wanted to ask about, back to, it's kind of Tat's question and the 8-month bit. So In November, the last time the Canadian press got a statement from AHS regarding the potential chartered surgical facilities in Red Deer and Lethbridge, in November we were told, like the contract negotiation process is still ongoing, and that these facilities, the quote reads, are expected to be operational within the next 2 to 3 years. As far as I know, these contracts haven't been finalized to this day, and the companies awarded these contracts has also not been publicly announced. So I guess I'm curious where you guys stand in really the future of those two facilities, and how it's kind of complicated by the fact of surgical backlogs in Alberta.
Yeah, well, let's go back to a bit of the timeline that we know of based on both the allegations that were, disclosed last week, but also the directive that came from the Minister of Health, which made it clear that at least sometime in December, that the former CEO went to the Minister of Health, who reports, of course, to the Premier as well, about concerns about the contract process for these surgical facilities, and that was the reason why allegedly the shading those contracts. Look, we have a huge problem in Alberta when it comes to the quality of healthcare and access to procedures and surgeries. And if that process and the access to healthcare is actually being delayed, it's because of the fact that allegedly the UCP has been engaging in some improper contracts and procurement processes to get these surgeries apparently delivered through these facilities. It's not, the responsibility of Albertans to say, we'll take it at whatever cost, right? We need to make sure that our public dollars are being spent well, and the allegations suggest that the money that was going to be spent on these contracts wasn't going to improve access to wait times and to healthcare procedures. It was actually going to pad the pockets of these private companies. Albertans could be better served if actually those dollars were being spent to provide those surgeries, either in public hospitals, but to get those wait times down. That should be the focus. So, we know for 8 months, that's the Premier's claiming that she was trying to figure out what evidence of wrongdoing was going on, but really what she wanted was those very cushy, very expensive contracts to be delivered faster. That's not about, I would suggest, that's not just about trying to bring down wait times for Albertans. That's actually about trying to pad the pockets of friends at a faster rate. And that is not certainly something that Albertans have an interest in.
You follow up?
This is going to be a little wordy, so bear with me. We know, and I don't need to tell you guys this, but the Auditor General obviously has a kind of a specific list of things that it can look at, and that's obviously why you are, calling for a judicial inquiry and for an RCMP investigation, because those two will get different answers, of course. But those aren't really things that we can just, that just happen on their own, Like, there's no easy way to get a judicial inquiry going. It's not like you can just call up a judge and be like, can you look into this? And my question with this is, what do you kind of think will happen if neither of those two groups, like the RCMP or a judicial inquiry, happens? Like, what does that mean for Albertans in terms of the future and kind of that sense of trust,
Well, I think that trust is already razor thin between Albertans and their government. We've seen that very much over the last week, but even prior to this, right? We know that there has been a very low level of trust in the government and in the Premier in terms of how they're making decisions. Look, if those processes don't proceed, that is actually, really going to be a blow to our democratic institutions, and it will be giving a green light to the UCP government to continue to do whatever they want to do with Alberta taxpayer dollars. And so I think Albertans demand and expect and deserve better than all of that. And I think there will be, many Albertans speaking out. I know our offices are already being flooded by people saying this is not what we expect from our government. We don't want to use our taxpayer dollars to pad private companies' pockets. We want to see healthcare outcomes. And so ultimately, it's going to be Albertans holding this government accountable. And frankly, I think every single UCP MLA should be looking in the mirror right now and looking at their leaders and saying, do we want to go down with the ship? Do we want to essentially have our reputation, our credibility tattered by the fact that this government will not come clean and be accountable accountable for their actions, and that they think that they are entitled to do whatever they want with Alberta taxpayer dollars. I don't think that's why a lot of us, certainly why none of us on the official opposition side, chose to serve and to put our names forward to be representing our constituents. We didn't do it to make a private company rich, and I don't think many of those UCP MLAs believe that either. So I think they should be speaking up.
Next, we will go to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, your line should be open.
Hey, I just want to clarify the language you used regarding what you want the Premier and Minister Lagrange to do, stepping aside. What does that mean? Because you're either Premier or you're not. You can't be like, oh, I'm off for the job for a few weeks and I'll come back. That's not how it works. So do you want Diana Smith to step down, to quit her job, or you want her to stay in her position but pledge that she won't interfere in any way with the investigation?
Look, Danielle Smith has 2 deputy premiers, and either one of those individuals should be able to step in and act for the premier while this investigation is going on. Certainly, same thing with the Minister of Health. There's other competent ministers who can stand up and answer questions and be able to make decisions while this is happening. This is a pretty standard thing. When somebody's being investigated, they don't get to continue on necessarily in their role. They step aside. I've worked in many employment settings, and if there's an investigation going on, especially one as profound as this one, when the allegations are as significant as this one, I think it's a reasonable thing for that person to be able to step aside and say, you know what, I'm not qualified right now. Certainly, I think the Minister of Health has demonstrated that she should not be exercising the authority that she gave herself in December to direct these contracts. She is clearly not in a position to do so until these investigations have been completed, all the investigations, and there's full transparency and accountability of what's happened.
You have a follow-up, Emmanuel?
I do. Thank you. What would reconvening the legislature actually do? I guess, yeah, the MLAs are coming back, and you can ask questions in QP to the Premier. She won't answer them more than she's answering them now. So what's the point of this call if she's already coming back to the legislature in 2 weeks anyway?
Well, I'm certainly not going to give in to the fact that the Premier doesn't deem her role as answering questions in the legislature as important. I certainly think that she does have an obligation to answer to Albertans. That is the role of the Premier. That is the role of the question period. That is the role of the legislature. If she chooses to take that time and to not answer the questions and to dodge them, Albertans should see that. Albertans have a right to see that. That's the point of calling the legislature to reconvene. Right now, she's not even standing up to answer questions. She's not even in the province and hasn't been for some time. We're saying she needs to show up and do her job and answer the questions. If she's too uncomfortable with those questions, if she doesn't want to answer them, Albertans have a right to see that as well.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions in the room. Catherine Kukowski.
Not good at the 2 question thing. So what? The plan has always been to take that arm's length agency of Alberta Health Services and bring it under political control. I'm wondering, what do you think is at risk here when all these decisions get made by a politician as opposed to through an arm's length agency?
Allow me to turn this over to the former Minister of Health.
Yes.
Thanks for the question, Catherine. Let's be frank, the buck stops with the minister. At the end of the day, they are responsible for the healthcare system and the delivery of it. The question that is on everyone's mind is, are they doing so in good faith? Are they doing so with evidence driving those decisions? Are they doing so trying to get the best deal for all Albertans? Are they going to end my pain? Are they going to make sure that my cancer treatment happens in a timely fashion? And the question is, can they be trusted to do that? So I don't think that this really, should there be 4 entities or 6 entities or 1 entity? I don't think that's the question. I think the question is, was there political interference? Were people, friends and insiders, getting rich off people's pain and suffering? There's only a certain number of anaesthetists, physicians who can do this kind of work, and people were moved out of the public system into private American-style healthcare, and people got richer while people were suffering in pain. And this is why we're asking for the Premier and anyone who's named in these allegations to step aside, to call for an independent judicial inquiry so we can all get to the bottom of it, because the buck does stop with the Premier and the Health Minister.
And I don't know if you'd have any insight as a former health minister or as an employment lawyer, but the health minister said that the contract termination of the former CEO had nothing to do with her going to the Auditor General. It was all part of the transition. Her contract, her predecessor's contract was for an indefinite term. Her contract was for 4 years. Is there any instance where terminating a contract that was for a definite period of time makes sense, or what was going on there, do you think?
I'll start and then turn things over to my labor lawyer, deputy leader colleague. What I will say is you don't sign a contract for 4 years if you plan on only having somebody in that position for a year. So that's ludicrous. The fact that there is severance and possibly even bigger payouts because of the termination of the contract and the conditions on which it happened, does not pass the head nod test. This is why they need to come back to the legislature. They need to be accountable. They need to answer to Albertans. And enough of the hiding. You know, they did this under Jason Kenney with the travel scandal and Aloha Gate. And now we have the Smith surgery scandal. Enough hiding, enough trying to duck. Albertans deserve transparency. We deserve answers. And we deserve government that we can trust, not one that's clouded in all sorts of allegations of potential criminality and other wrongdoing. But Rakhi.
I know, Sarah, you did that pretty well. But yeah, fundamentally, if you sign a 4-year contract with somebody, especially as an executive at the level of the CEO of AHS, and you terminate that contract early, that means that you're obligated to pay the full term of the contract, which is you know, what I believe the former CEO is claiming. So it is hard to believe that if the intent all along was for the AHS's CEO's contract to be terminated or to only be until the transition took place, it doesn't make sense why they would have financially put Alberta on the hook for so much more if they were going to ultimately end that after a year. So the contract agreement terms suggest that this is not the case, that she was always going to be moved out of her role once she was terminated. Again, this is just based allegedly on what we know of the contract.
Jeremy Thompson with CTV Edmonton. What sort of consequences could come from a public inquiry? This is like the legal system is involved.
Correct. So a public inquiry has greater capacity than any of those those 3 individual processes under the the RCMP, the Ethics Commissioner, as well as the Auditor General, who are confined to some degree by the terms of their legislation as to what they can look into. They do. I mean, the RCMP has pretty broad criminal powers, of course. But under a public inquiry, really, the terms of that inquiry can be set. There's authority to be able to call people under oath, to require that evidence be provided, and those recommendations and conclusions to be brought out. Now, really, we've seen various versions of public inquiries and judicial-led public inquiries across Canada. But the point here is that it would not be as narrowly scoped as some of the other processes. It would be a broader scope that to be determined by the inquiry, but with the authority to ask for that information, to get behind some of the things that we are seeing. We know, where FOIP is sometimes used to cover up certain, terms of agreements and such like that. We need a broader perspective to be able to get all that information and to make those conclusions. That's what we're looking for, is that, and to be led by a judge, somebody who has the authority, who understands the rule of law. It is very important to bring some legitimacy and accountability into this process, particularly when looking at a process that allegedly had no accountability and no legitimacy.
All right, looking for one last pass. I think we're all set. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference for today.
Thank you.